Hello, a very warm welcome to this workshop called From Surviving to Thriving, Practical Compassion for the Educator. My name is Kim John Payne, and I'm the author of many books, The Soul of Discipline, Simplicity Parenting, and Being at Your Best When Kids Are at Their Worst, which some of today's workshop will be based on. I wanted to start our work together today by giving you just a little story of a situation that came up in my many years of educating. This was something that used to often amuse me. And it was a situation where the children and I would run down to the playing field, and we would open up a garden shed. And in that garden shed, which we used to store some of our play equipment, there would be a large winding device for rope. And it would wind rope up so it would store rather nicely. However, my colleague would often run his lessons right up until the last minute, and he would just simply throw, I think it was about 150 meters or more of rope just into this shed, and it would create a huge tangle. So the children would open up the door and they would say again, "Mr. Payne, it's all tangly. Shall we play the tangly game again?" And I'd say, "Oh yes, let's do." And we would send a couple of children up to the top part of the building overlooking the playing field, and they would run up there and open a window and they could look down and see us. And then everyone would get ready and we would count, go. And we would see how long it took us to untangle this huge long length of plastic rope. And what we learned was never pull on a tangle. Never pull on a tangle. If you pull on a knot, then it gets tighter and tighter. And the children up top, way up high, 4 stories high in the building, would be looking down, saying things like, "Annie, don't pull," because there were certain children who just couldn't help themselves. And we would undo this rope, and it would be becoming more and more undone as we would loosen and create more space and create more space, until finally, hooray, it was all undone. And Rowan would get his watch and he would click it and say, 3 minutes, 45 seconds. And the children would shout, because it might be a new record. And then the children would come down out the tower, the couple that were up there helping us. And we would then begin to play using this rope as a big boundary on the grass. And that was our field where we could play. Now, the reason this image often comes back to my mind is that when we work with children as educators, I think it's important to remember to never pull on an emotional tangle. When our feelings are becoming conflicted, when we are getting into situations with children where there's tensions, how do we create space? How do we create that opening of never pulling on a tangle? And that is what we're going to explore in this workshop. How can we open up space? How can we, in a sense, give ourselves the feeling of inner spaciousness that enables us to not tighten and to not lock down on a problem? That's a really big part of our work together today. Just never pulling on a tangle. all through this hour we'll spend together now or so, I'll be giving little hints and tools that we can use. And then we'll be following that up with an exercise called the compassionate response. And that will follow this. But let's look at one of the first little tools you can use. When a child is pressing our buttons, when they are provoking us or provoking each other, but when a child is starting to behave in a way that is hard for us, one of the first questions I find to ask is, can you help me understand? Can you help me understand what's happening for you now? Can you help me understand why this is so hard for you? What's going wrong? And that question of, genuine question of, can you help me understand? It means we're opening that knot. We're reaching out. We're not pulling on something. We're genuinely reaching out to a child and asking them, can they help us understand why they're feeling like that? What's going wrong for them? And I found so often, if I can ask that question pretty early on, when I'm sensing that things aren't going well, very often, not always, but very often, a child will reach out to us, reach out to me as an educator, and say things like, well, it's just not fair that this has to happen, or why is there so much homework? Or a little one might say, it's just going wrong, But that reaching out, can you help me understand? I wanted to present right in the early parts of our workshop together that as a practical tool. The next practical tool that I'd like to suggest in terms of opening and never pulling on a knot is, first of all, to recognize where the knot actually is. And the best way to recognize where a knot is one of the best ways is to turn to our own tensions within our own body. To really, when a child is triggering us, a child is misbehaving, to turn to our body and notice where our tensions are. For some of us, the tensions when we're starting to get frustrated with a child might be in our jaw or in our eyes. Our eyes might start to harden. We might drop our head. Our jaw might start to tighten. That's more around the face. Some people experience that, other people don't. Other people start to feel a constriction in their throat and start to feel a tension. Their voice starts to change. Their voice starts to become a little higher as that squeezing in the throat occurs. And some people don't experience that. What a lot of people experience is tension in their shoulders. That's very common. So do I feel tension in my shoulders? That might be your tension that you experience. There are others, people have described over the years tension in their forearms, their hands come into a ball, into a fist by their side. Others have described tensions in their stomach, in their abdomen, and feeling tight. Others have described in their legs tightening up or locking out in their knees. There are many kinds of tensions. But what I'd like to do now is invite you to pause and consider, where is your tension? Where is it? Because this is not a random exercise. if we're aware of our somatics, aware of our body tensions, aware of our emotional anatomy, it acts as an early warning sign. It acts as a way for us to know, usually just that little bit ahead of our emotions. It can signal to us that we are about to get frustrated and have that frustration come out of us, and have that frustration. We might raise our voice, or we might become very severe. But one of the ways in which to give ourselves an early warning sign, like a siren, like a fire siren going off, but before the fire strikes, or we see the smoke on the horizon, and we know that there is something. It's an early warning sign that something is going off inside us. Where are your tensions? Are they in your face somehow? Throat? Are they in your shoulders or chest? In your lower body? Really take that into consideration as we move through our workshop today, because that theme will come back. Where is my tension? Another key aspect of never pulling on a knot is to understand that most of us have unconscious or only slightly conscious communication habits. Now, some of them are really good ones, and some of them are not helpful at all. One teacher I was speaking to said that her most unhelpful communication habit was slight sarcasm, a humor that had a darkness, an edge to it. And she dealt with her frustration by being sarcastic, and that very often would set the children off. That very often would have a child answering back in not a helpful way, or coming back at her because they didn't like being spoken to that way. And then the trouble would escalate, would get worse and worse. Do you have an unconscious communication habit? Now, of course, it's a hard question, right? So one of the things I would suggest is, if you really want to know, if you're courageous enough, this takes some courage, go to a colleague, a trusted colleague, and ask them. Ask them, do I have an unconscious habit? You know, are there times when I am sarcastic, or when I'm very cold and silent and harsh and withdraw? That's another one. There are all kinds of unconscious communication habits, both with our language, with our words, but also with our body. It might be that we roll our eyes when we're annoyed, and the children really pick this up. So if you have a trusted colleague at school, ask them, do I have an unconscious body language or spoken language communication habit? You could ask, if no one comes to mind, you could ask a friend, someone outside the school, because usually our habits inside the school, well, sometimes there are also habits outside our educating time as well. So become aware of your communication habits, and that's another way to not pull on this knot, to not pull on this tension. Now, a third, or actually fourth point that I'd like to bring up is being aware that our classroom can't always be free of tensions, can't always be in perfect harmony. So it's what I call harmony addiction, where We become addicted to harmony and always wanting harmony and always wanting the children to behave and always wanting the children to be polite and respectful, and of course that's an aim. Of course that's fine. But there'll be times when things aren't going well. There'll be times when children are not behaving well. There'll be times when we're not at our best as an educator. And I think it's important to, in terms of opening and not creating, not pulling on that knot, pulling on that tangle, it's very important to understand that that when times don't go well, that's also okay. It's a part of being an educator. It's just a part of what we move through every day. Now, I know that we know this. I know that we all know that there are days that won't go well, and we think, why isn't this going better? And we can try and move into what I think of as a forcing current, a forcing gesture to make the day be harmonious. Or if we get to the end of the day and it hasn't been a harmonious day, we think, am I not a good educator? What was I doing wrong? And I think, forgive me for saying the obvious here, but when a day doesn't go well, to accept it as a part of life, to look at why, and to see there were aspects that were going on that made the day frustrating, that didn't have it go very well, but to also accept it. And that's my main point here, is to accept that the path of an educator is a very vulnerable path. It takes so much courage to be a teacher, so much, to get up in the morning and do this hardest of all jobs again. There are very few professions that demand what education does. And I think to be able to be accepting of when it doesn't go well is a very important, it sounds so obvious, but it's a very important part of our path as educators. Now, tied closely to this is often, when I've spoken with educators, there's a real reason, very often, that this always striving for harmony and not feeling good if that's not achieved. There's quite often a reason that educators will speak to me, and it's many of us, and it's very understandable, are what we could call conflict aversive. We try and avoid conflict. We try and move around discomfort. We try to never be in a situation that feels tense. Now, just with that rope, there's always going to be knots. There's always going to be tensions. And here's another little tool, another tip. If you feel like this would help you, sit quietly when it feels right to you, when you have a quiet moment, or have a conversation with a trusted colleague, trusted friend, family member, and start to explore what it is about your way of being that tends to avoid conflict, that tends to move around it, tends to be very uncomfortable. Now, this might not be you. You might be okay with conflict, okay with emotions, okay with the children becoming upset. It could be perfectly fine. But if it's not, find someone, talk with them about it. sit quietly by yourself, think about it. Is there something in my biography that leads me to feel quite uncomfortable with any kind of conflict? And because what often happens is that then there is a over-controlling that creeps in, where we try to really suppress the children, control, always be in charge, which is not a bad thing to be in charge of a classroom, but it can spill over and become very oppressive. It can become very dictatorial. And we want to be educators, not dictators. And that often begins in our own biographies, where perhaps there was something in our family life where there was a lot of suppression or a lot of anger, and it's made us afraid of anger. It's made us want to move away from it, control it whenever it comes up. Find someone trusted and speak to them about it, or quietly just consider it yourself. While we're exploring the past and speaking about it now, one of the things that many educators have spoken about to me over the years in my role as a consultant, my long years as a teacher, but also as a consultant and a trainer. I work at my university, Antioch University here in the United States. I've been a professor there for over 20 years now. And something that is often spoken about is situations of when we were at school ourselves, and there were ways in which the teachers disciplined us, ways in which teachers spoke to us that we have unconsciously absorbed. Just consider this for a moment. Were there teachers in your school life that you really admired? Let's think of one now. Was there a teacher you really admired, felt comfortable with? Really, it was good to be in their classroom, good to be in their presence. Now, was there a teacher that felt very uncomfortable? They didn't recognize you, or somehow blamed or shamed you. Their discipline was harsh. What they did and the way they spoke was somehow just not okay for you. It's good to explore this so that you're aiming more towards the teacher that you admire, because we can absorb certain negative teaching practices, and this is something that it's almost counterintuitive. It's unusual, because you would think, why would we ever why would we ever replicate? Why would we absorb anything that a teacher that we did not like, why would we absorb that and at times be more like that with a child in our own classroom? It's surprising how often this happens. Of course, for some of us it does not, of course. But exploring this and really knowing, is there some teacher in my past that when I'm stressed, this is only when you're stressed, of course, but when I'm stressed, I am somewhat replicating their behavior. Other people have said to me, well, you know what, it's not really an educator that I'm replicating, a teacher. It's more my own parents or someone within my family that didn't treat me well that I'm replicating. But have a think about that, and this may not be an issue for you at all, but it is an issue for many, and it's something that can sit there unconsciously within ourselves for years and years without us knowing it. In the countless numbers of workshops I've done all around the world, it's surprising how many people have said to me, you know what, I did not know or understand that I was replicating all the influences of harsh discipline from my father or mother or from that educator in the 3rd grade. Somehow that crept into me. And now that I'm aware of it, I'm going to change that. I'm going to be aware of when that voice, that particular voice, that you just don't want to speak like that. You don't want to have that voice. You want to speak in your voice, your true voice, your authentic voice. So take a moment to also explore that. And now we come to a core principle in how we can have this kind of feeling of thriving within a classroom and have the children feel this sense of health and thriving as well. And it begins back with understanding something quite special. That is that I don't really think there is any such thing as a disobedient child. I simply do not believe in disobedience. Now bear with me for a moment, because I know that might sound strange. And I've met some of the most disobedient children. I was a teacher, but also a school counselor. And I know there are children who are naughty. I know there are children who push us. But I don't really believe in conscious disobedience. So rare. Maybe a few times in all my 30 years of educating, but very, very rare. What I see is disorientation. This is not disobedience. It's disorientation. Now, disorientation is a very uncomfortable feeling for a child. There's very few things for a human being as psychologically stressful as feeling disoriented, as feeling I don't know where I stand, feeling that I don't get it, I don't belong here. That feeling, very uncomfortable. Now, when a child is feeling uncomfortable, either socially, they're disoriented, their friendships are changing, or they don't have friends, or they've just been excluded, they don't know how to make friends, that's socially. Sometimes a child can feel disoriented academically. They don't understand what's going on, they don't get the science or the math or the languages or the writing. They don't understand and they start to feel very disoriented. Or it might be behaviorally. They don't feel understood by the teacher. They will challenge a teacher's authority. All these ways of being disoriented will lead a child to behave in a challenging way. The metaphor that I often think of is that of pinging. Now, what pinging means, and the reason I think of that metaphor, is that when a mariner, a submariner at sea, wants to get their bearings, they send out a sonic ping, a noise, and it hits something out in the oceans, on the ocean floor, or an ocean mountain, and bounces back. And they send out a second ping, and it sounds like this. The noise is ping, and they send it out. It hits something, it bounces back, and they very often do it a third time, and they send out a ping. It hits something, bounces back, and they keep sending out pings until it reaches something, bounces back, and they get their bearings. They get their geographical bearings. Now, when our children are disoriented behaviorally, socially, emotionally, academically, they send out behavioral pings. Their behavior, they send out often bad behavior, difficult behavior, and we're getting pinged. Have you ever had a child, and I suspect you have, where they do something quite challenging, and then they look right at you? And like, what are you going to do about that? And they look at you. You know you're getting pinged. Even if they don't look at you, you know you're getting echolocated. You're getting pinged. Now, the most important part of understanding the pinging process is that it shifts our thinking. And if there is a shift in our thinking around children's behavior, that they are disoriented, not disobedient, then a few really quite wonderful things happen. One of them is that we move into a space, a very special space that opens that tangle. And I think of this as the wonder of wondering. The wonder of wondering. And we look at a child who is disoriented and behaving badly, and we wonder, I wonder what's happening for you. And inwardly we wonder why they needed to talk like this. I wonder why you're so lost. I've seen teachers do this who truly get this principle of pinging and use the wonder of wondering, and immediately they've created space within their own soul. They've created space within their own heart. Because we can't wonder and be angry at the same time. The amygdala in the brain, the fight or flight brain, is soothed, is calmed when we wonder, because that's the limbic system. When the limbic system wonders, and the frontal lobes, even higher brain function, the frontal lobes in the neocortex wonder, the fight or flight part of our brain is soothed, and space is created in that knot, in that tangle. The moment we wonder, a child said something quite challenging, and you look at them kindly, wonderingly. In that moment, a child is scanning you. A child is often looking right at you, because there is almost no point in talking with a lot of words to a child who's very angry, very upset, because the parts of the brain that receive speech have largely shut down. All they're doing is looking at you, scanning you, trying to see if you're safe. That's all they're interested in. Now, when we wonder, when we truly wonder, our eyes soften at the sides. Our eyes soften. Our mouth softens. It goes from a tight lip to a slightly softer, almost imperceptible when we wonder. Our eyes don't focus very hard. They look a little bit into the middle distance. Like, I wonder. Eyes are softer. Mouth is softer. Shoulders soften. And the child, in that moment, only really is scanning a teacher for two things. One is for body language, to know if they're safe or unsafe. Do they have to fight back, or can they begin to de-escalate? And the other thing that they're looking for is tone. They're not really listening to the words we speak, but when we do speak, they're really tuning into the tone, body language and tone. And the wonder of wondering, if we do that, it's a it's a tiny little thing. No one would really notice that around you that you're doing it. But the very best teachers that I've ever seen have this ability to not take it personally. You see, and the wonder of wondering helps us not take it personally. You can't wonder about why a child is disoriented on one hand and take it personally on the other. It's almost impossible. And when a child understands that you're not taking it personally, there is another point of where they feel safe. The wonder of wondering. Now here's the part that I kind of like the best in some ways, is that when we wonder what is happening for a child, we don't necessarily need to have an answer. We don't. If we can figure it out, that's good. If we think, I wonder if that child had a really bad experience at home, or I know what happened, that we had a lesson before where they just didn't get the decimal fractions, the decimals that we're using, and now they're grumpy, or whatever it is. You might come up with an answer, but it actually doesn't really matter. What matters is that you did not take it personally. Your face was softer, your body language was just that little bit more receptive, and the child recognizes you're safe. That's pinging, and that is the wonder of wondering. It's almost like the way I think of it is being inquisitive rather than accusative. And so you're not accusing the child of anything. You're wondering, why is this going on? Very small but mighty and powerful gesture for an educator to cultivate. And I know we all wonder from time to time, but this is a capacity, if we cultivate it, really every time we start to feel tensions in our body and a child is misbehaving and frustrating us, if we can train ourselves into the magic of wondering, that power of wondering, if that becomes a place that we go to every time we feel frustrated, every time, then our path as an educator will I almost promise you will be very different. Now, moving on from there, one of the things that countless educators have said to me over these decades is that one of the things that frustrates them most is feeling undervalued, feeling unseen. And we're working so hard as educators, responding to so many needs, and when a child devalues us, or it might be a colleague or an administrator or a parent, but we're feeling unseen, undervalued, almost like we're being made to be invisible, or at the very best, like low-paid servants. This is very frustrating. We're professional people, we work hard, we prepare our lessons, we're really doing our best. And when a child undervalues an educator, it can be very triggering. Many, many teachers have spoken to me over the years about this feeling of being triggered. Now, one of the ways that I first really this came into consciousness for me was when I was visiting in Southern Africa. And there again, I was helping educators and actually counselors and therapists, which is my other hat. I'm a family counselor as well as a teacher. And people in Southern Africa greet each other in a very special way. And I would hear it in the mornings. I would be in my room, I got up quite early, getting ready for the day. The sun would be rising, and there was a marketplace just outside my window. And I would hear the African folk greeting each other. And the word they use is Sobanu. Sobanu, and you would hear it, Sobanu, Sobanu. And Sobanu means, I see you, I see you. And then the words that the person who was greeted would speak back were Ngohona, Ngohona. And Ngohona, with that delightful click, Ngohona means, so now I am here. Sobanu, I see you. Ngohona, so now I am here. It's beautiful, isn't it? When someone sees you, you can be here. But if someone won't see you, if a child is making you feel unseen, very often we don't feel like we're truly present. And I think to understand that this can be a subtle but quite deep emotion to not feel seen. Ultimately, the word I think of is dehumanized, is that we can feel truly dehumanized. And that is, again, another very powerful derailing emotion, is to feel unseen, undervalued, and ultimately underneath all that, dehumanized. So how is it that we can begin to build that feeling of being seen? Some of the educators I've watched over the years, who the children really do see, do value, do give them that feeling of being visible to them, are the same educators who see the children. It begins with us. We have power over this. Being unseen can feel very powerless. But one way many teachers have commented to me over the years is when I ask them, step up your gratitudes to the children without going too far, but quiet, simple little gratitudes. If a child brings in something falls on the floor and they pick it up and put it on your desk or put it on the desk of another child, say to them, Anna, thank you for doing that. Thank you. Give small gratitudes to the children and have your day filled with small gratitudes, little things that you notice. For example, when I was teaching in elementary school, at the end of the day, I would often have this, well, actually not often, every day, I would have a moment of 3 things your teacher has noticed today. Now, the normal class, which was quite, noisy like any class, were silent. And I'd say to them, now, Annie, I noticed today that when all those pencils went all over the floor from one of your classmates, you helped pick them all up and put them back just right. That's the first thing I noticed. Well, actually, the second thing I noticed is in the playground, in one of our chasing games and tag games, I noticed that there was someone who got quite sad, who was tagged and didn't feel they were. And I noticed, Sam, you went over and sat with that child. I noticed there was someone in our class who went over and comforted someone. And then a third one. And the children, they would listen so carefully to this. Now that was a formal moment of gratitude, but there can be small moments. Now other teachers have then asked the children for moments of gratitude, and you can do that too. I was visiting with one teacher who had the children sit in a circle at the end of the day, pushed the tables and chairs back and sat in a circle, so they were all facing each other. And she would express some small gratitudes, and then she would ask the children, are there any gratitudes? Does anyone have anything they're grateful for? Now I could tell the children had been doing this for some while because they spoke up, and she had a talking stick. It was a beautiful carved piece of wood, and that would get handed to the speaker. So too many children didn't speak. Only the person with the stick could talk. And they would say a gratitude, and then another, and then another, and then another. And it was surprising how many gratitudes there were. That was a very happy class. And it was a group of children that worked things out together well, because it was a place of safety. But the gratitudes, the truly humanizing of another child, begin with us. But they only really work if they're authentic, if they're real. And I find that to be grateful for things that actually are done is a wonderful thing we can do for children. Now, moving on from there is another source of when the knot tightens. When the knot tightens, when I've been in classrooms where teachers have been quick to anger, frustrated, sarcastic, over-controlling, when I speak with them afterwards, when I'm there helping them, doing whatever I can to help them be the best teacher that they can be and to thrive rather than just survive. One thing I hear a lot, and this is the theme of overwhelm. Frustrated teachers are very often have a feeling of being overwhelmed, that there is too much for them to do, that their cup is overflowing, so to speak, that there are too many demands on them, too little time to achieve it. And this feeling of overwhelm, of like we're drowning, like the water levels are rising and rising, and it's a feeling of surviving. That's when a teacher, as teachers, we can get very anxious, and we then become quick to be sharp with the children, or over-controlling, and we're not relaxed anymore, there's not so much fun, humor. We might be quite a funny person. We enjoy humor, just quiet humor. Some of the best teachers have this quiet humor, very just beautiful. But that begins to fade. When we're stressed, that begins to fade. And what else fades when we're stressed is if one small thing goes wrong, just one, we can feel that spreads, and we can start, if even just one or or two children are misbehaving, we can become very we can go into discipline for the whole class. And it's really just one or two, perhaps three, but we spread it. We don't bracket it. What I'm suggesting is this kind of stress leads us to not bracket things, to not be able to keep it in perspective. One of the things I think to become very aware of in creating space is, first of all, I want to give a few very, very practical hints. If we want to create space inwardly, one of the really helpful ways to do that is create a sense of space and spaciousness outwardly. Look at your classrooms and simplify them. Pack things away. Make them very simple on the eye. Make them very simple visually. Declutter as much as you can. Put books in a bookshelf and put a curtain in front of the bookshelf. Take materials and put them in baskets and put the baskets in places so that visually it's very simple. Take a lot of things that are on the walls. Classrooms, in my opinion, are far too cluttered with things on the walls. One woman said to me at my university, when I gave them the task of decluttering their classrooms, and this was a teacher of 20 years, very experienced teacher, came back to me and said, I'm kind of embarrassed because I took everything down. I decluttered, I made the surfaces smooth, all the horizontal surfaces were cleared, the shelves, desks, all the horizontals were cleared. I took down things off the walls, all that stuff off the walls, very little, very little. Now, she was coming back to my university to upgrade her qualifications to a master's degree, but she'd been teaching, as I said, for a long time. And she said, I'm embarrassed because for the first time in 20 years, I was the most interesting thing in the room. And not just me, but the children were interesting to each other. They started becoming more social. We weren't being distracted by all that clutter. When you create a simple, spacious environment outside yourself, that can give you a feeling of spaciousness inside, and in that knot of rope that we talked about, you've just opened up some space. That's the first thing. The second thing to create spaciousness is have your day be rhythmical. Have your day follow certain predictable, rhythmical patterns, so that in the morning we do this, and in the afternoon this, and before we finish, we do this. Now, if you're a subject teacher moving around various classes, high school teacher, then in that 45 minutes to an hour, or however long you have, 30 minutes, Again, when you first enter the room, you can still have rhythm. Firstly, you greet the children, just greeting them. Don't walk into a classroom and straight away say, everyone sit down. It's a big mistake. Reach out to them, be interested in them. Ask them, how you doing? Oh, is it really, really, really hot today? Oh gosh, it is, isn't it? Or do you remember yesterday you mentioned you were having trouble with that homework? Did that go okay? Oh, you sat up late doing it? Okay. Then, and you just reach out to the children, and you have a little rhythm, and then you might deliver the content, but you might give, and this is a key thing, a preview of what you're about to teach. Some of the most masterful teachers I've seen, and this doesn't mean old, sometimes quite younger colleagues, have had the ability to preview the content. They've let the children know what it is they're going to learn. So it's this principle of tell them what you're about to teach them, 1. Teach them, 2. And then tell them what you taught them, 3. Preview, teach, review. And there's this rhythm. And when the children come to expect those rhythms, it could be, there was one little boy, I was very recently in a kindergarten, and one little boy who was greeting his mother later in the day, the mother asked him how it went, and he said, "Mummy, when I come in, I take my outside shoes off and I put my slippers on. And then when I put my slippers on, I put my coat on my coat hook. It has a picture of a bear. The bear one is mine. I like the bear one. And then I go in, and then what I do right away," and he walked his mother through the day. He'd only been there a couple of weeks. He was very new. And he was so pleased at all the things that he could expect. Rhythm is healing. Rhythm is so healing to anxiety when a child knows what's coming next because they've done it over and over, and then it comes true. Now you may think that's boring, but it's the opposite. It's when it's done warmly with a light touch, children relax into it, and their own amygdala, their own fight or flight response is calmed because they form a picture of what's coming next because they know it, and then it comes true. And that is a way to just open up the tangle, open it up, open it up. I also wanted to mention transitions. Some of the biggest problems we have in education come up, behavioral problems, in transitions. When the children are moving from one activity to another, from one classroom to another. And I'm going to suggest that every transition has a preview, that you never transition the children without quietening them first and saying, "Now, I'm going to tell you what it is we're transitioning to, where we're transitioning, how we're transitioning, and give them a very strong picture of how it is that you're going to be transitioning." Even middle school and high school students, actually especially, I've taught for years in a high school. I taught in a K through 12, a kindergarten through 12 school, and often I would be saying to some 9th or 10th graders, we're going to be transitioning down to the gym. The younger children or the younger grades are going to be around. Can we just keep it quiet as we walk by? Because they're rehearsing their play, all right? They're just around, as we go out, they're just around the corner there. I'll be at the door to remind you as we go out the building, just to keep it quiet. Is everyone going to be okay with that? Are you sure you got it? Because their play is tomorrow and we're going to go see it, but Do you think that, has everyone got it? And, you know, kids are so honorable so often. And you know, I'll stand at the door and I'll give them another reminder. And maybe when we arrive at the gym, I'll say to them, you know, thank you. 10th grade, that was pretty great. There was a little bit of noise there. You might look right at one of the noisy ones. There was a bit of noise. But most of us did that particularly well, and we were all trying. It's okay. Good. To preview for the older ones, the younger ones, if you're going to transition, I actually saw a teacher of a 2nd grade of quite difficult children. Actually, she had her hands full. And whenever they would transition out the room, she would ask them to put their head on the desk. And she would actually paint them a picture. That's what she called it. Let me paint you a picture of where we're going to and how we're going to go there. And the children, and she basically created a visualization, right? Just like an athlete before they're about to run a race, you know, they have this visualization where they picture the race. She was helping them picture the transition. And it went pretty well. And I said to her, gosh, that was beautifully done. You know, that was great. And she said, no, that was pure self-preservation. Unless I do that, it's like a riot, you know. So it was lovely. It was really lovely. She did that. So these are some tips about how we can create spaciousness within our day so we don't feel so overwhelmed. Now, lastly, I wanted to place all of this in the kind of, in a sense of looking at what we can control within our teaching and what we are concerned about in our teaching. And I wanted to finish up now with this piece of practical advice. In Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, you might know it, he talks about one essential key of an effective person, of an effective educator, I would say. And that is to know the difference between your circle of concern, which is very large, and your circle of control, which is always smaller, always smaller. What you can influence is small. What you're concerned about is kind of large. You know, one might be concerned about world events, about pandemics. You might be concerned about the amount of violent video media that your children are consuming. You might be concerned about the fragmentation in their family life. You might be concerned about the overwhelm of high-stakes testing and exams and how much psychological pressure that puts on kids. All these are concerns. But there's very, very little you can do about it. The highly effective teacher will work within their sphere of influence. And what I'd like to invite you to do is to really think about what is within my influence and what is not. Because very often, if we're looking at our concerns, presuming we can change them, let's say we're considering the testing and how stressful that is, we can't change it. But what is within our sphere of influence? Well, we can be as relaxed as we possibly can about the tests coming up. There are teachers who have taught the children meditation, yoga, stretching, have taught them centering exercises to do before and during the exam if they're getting stressed. Now, this is just one example of many, many of what's within our control. That is within our influence and control, to teach the children how to cope with the stress and anxiety. Our circle of concern is we wish that wasn't happening in that way. Circle of concern, which is large, and circle of influence and control, which is smaller, and the highly effective teacher will act mainly within their circle of influence. Doesn't mean we forget our concerns, but it does mean we stay within our influence. Now, on that note, we'll round off this part of the presentation and look towards some of the more practical exercises coming right on up. Okay. Hope that was helpful.